So I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight, and wanted to acknowledge a couple people before we begin the program. First of all, my name's State Representative Cory Mason, and I'm thrilled to be at the Racine Public Library for this event honoring Black History Month. And specifically, I'd like to recognize Jessica McVeigh, the librarian here, for doing her great work. And I'd also like to acknowledge a couple other people that were here and that are represented here. County Executive Jim Ladwig was here briefly before the program started, so I wanted to acknowledge his presence here. And then Beth Brammy from Senator Wirch's office is also here and does a great job for the senator here in Racine and in Madison, representing him. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about, and also, I'm sorry, Kimberly Kane, who's also a community leader who's running for local office, is here as well. But people have asked a couple of times, well, why do an event like this? And the reason behind it is pretty simple. We have a great tradition in this country of celebrating Black History Month in February. And we learn about many great national figures who are important at both a national and state level, but sometimes we forget how important Racine's contributions are to the legacy of African American history here in this country. And so what I wanted to do with the help of Representative Barnes and Pastors Garrison and Hargrove, and we're waiting for an additional speaker who may be here shortly as well, is really acknowledge some of the local leaders who've been so important to African American history here in Wisconsin. Come on up, Pastor. So with that, we will begin, and I want to just give a framework for a couple of the figures that we'll talk about today. Two of them actually have books here in the library about them. Probably the most renowned story that people hear a lot about is the story of Joshua Glover. And there's a book called Finding Freedom that you can check out here in the library in his untold story. But it's a great story of abolition. We'll get to it shortly. But the other book that is now going to be in the library's collection is a book that was put out by the Wisconsin Historical Society. One of the people we're going to feature today, a man named Blue Jenkins, who is going to be discussed shortly here. Jameel, why don't you come on and join us up front here? We'll go through the program. So what we're going to do briefly is just go through some of the people that we wanted to honor. There's 8 local figures that we wanted to honor as being historically significant for Black History Month. I want to make clear, I don't think that this is an exhaustive list. These are not the only people that could be recognized, but there's certainly a good representative list of people who could be acknowledged throughout time. So with that, what I'm going to do is start with the board that has Lloyd Jackson at the top of it, and go to the other one, so we know from left to right, and just take turns telling a little bit about each of the figures that are here. There's a paragraph about each of them, but the reason many of the people that are here today is because some of the people here actually have personal experiences with some of these figures, and I wanted for you to hear firsthand a little bit about each of them. So the first person we're going to talk about is a gentleman named Lloyd Jackson, who was Racine's first African-American alderman in 1968. He was also the first African-American chairman of the Racine County Democratic Party. He became Racine's first African-American school principal in 1966 and was known for encouraging high achievement among African-Americans. So in 3 important sectors, he really played an important role. And keep in mind, this is 1966, 1968. These were not unrenowned times when it came to civil rights and the equal treatment of people regardless of their race here in Racine, in the state of Wisconsin, or certainly across the country. So his presence on that city council and being a part of the NAACP and being a public educator was really felt throughout the community. So he's the first person we want to talk about and honor. The next person we want to talk about, I'm going to ask Pastor Garrison to talk about, and that's Ms. Owens. I had the distinction of actually honoring her as a hometown hero on the floor of the State Assembly during my second term, it might have been my first term, but several years ago, and it was great to hear her stories. But I wanted to bring up Pastor Garrison to talk about Ms. Reed specifically. Pastor Garrison.
Thank you, Representative. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm here to talk about someone that I have nicknamed as Racine Rosa Parks. And I found that many people would agree with me with that nickname. Cory Owens was quite a quite a woman, quite a pioneer in the progression of society. I nicknamed her Rosa Parks because I also had the pleasure of pastoring Rosa Parks in her latter days. Primarily because Rosa Parks is really a very stand back and very soft-spoken woman. I was very surprised. That's one difference between Rosa Parks, however, and Cory Owens. Cory Owens was active in so many things, not only education, but she was very active in the Fair Housing Act and the Fair Housing demonstration here at Racine. Cory Owens was not only president of the NAACP, but she more or less acted as if mayor of Racine while she was in that office. I'm very proud of saying that I was her pastor, but in order to understand why all this happened and why I'm here, is to really say something about our background as an organization of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, not trying to convert anyone. But the African Methodist Episcopal Church is a little more than just a church. It's a movement. It came out of protests in Philadelphia in 1787. And what it was a movement to join the abolitionist movement in the United States of America. Why? It didn't start with just African Americans. It started way back with John and Charles Wesley. We believe that in order to be a citizen of any community, we have to be concerned about every citizen of the community. And for that reason, we lift up Cory Owens and all those men and women who helped make the history that we have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then I have the distinct honor of introducing next a colleague of mine from the Milwaukee area, and I'm thrilled that he was willing to come down here and join us for this. Mandela Barnes has been a great colleague and friend and champion for ordinary working citizens everywhere, but he also happens to be very close to Congresswoman Gwen Moore. And despite her being a Congresswoman from Milwaukee, she is from Racine. She was born and raised here, and still calls Racine the center of the universe. And so, even though she doesn't represent us, we claim her as our own. And here to talk to us more about Congresswoman Gwen Moore is Representative Mandela Barnes of Milwaukee.
Thank you. As Representative Mason stated, I am honored to also be his colleague in the state assembly. You guys got a good one on your hands, and while you guys can claim Gwen Moore, we have her. So I've recently, since being elected, have had the honor of growing a pretty decent relationship with the Congresswoman beforehand. Had the chance to work with her on the other side of issues, bringing those issues to her and organizing. And she was one of those people who always came out to meet you instead. You know, a lot of members will have you meet with their staff. Even a lot of state legislators will have you meet with their staff. But Congresswoman Moore, as a representative, will come out and say, you know what, let me speak to these people because I know they're from Milwaukee. If she's on the way to a meeting, she'll always stop and shake your hand. And that's what I always appreciate about the Congresswoman. So after being elected, getting to grow closer to her, it's a big deal for me. And to say that I know her personally, because when we talk about Black history, we talk about a lot about the national scene, what happened around the rest of this country, but there are so many gems in the state of Wisconsin in regards to Black history, and there are so many here in the city of Racine, with the Congresswoman being one of them, and she's living history. And as a part of living history, she has the will, the want to not just stop there with her, but to bring up other younger leaders. She's very supportive of the youth who are now getting involved in politics and social justice in the city of Milwaukee. And she makes time for people, which is very important as long as she's been involved. A lot of people maybe not even remember it, but she was elected to the state assembly in 1988. She served there, and after 4 years, she went on to the state senate, becoming the first African American woman in the state senate. So, which is another remarkable achievement in itself. There had only been 2 more since her election in 1992, and then 12 years later, became the first African American, period, male or female to represent Wisconsin in the United States Congress, which is a notable achievement. And when I go to other states and I meet people, oh, you're from Milwaukee, that's where Congresswoman Ghuari Moore is from. I'm like, yeah, I know her. But people appreciate the Congresswoman outside of Racine, obviously, because we're glad that we have her as a representative. People outside of the state also appreciate Congresswoman Moore, her contributions to our federal government, championing the Violence Against Women Act and ensuring that it was renewed along with other remarkable pieces of legislation. So congratulations to you, Racine, for producing such a wonderful figure in our state's history.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Jameel Ghuari, who I'd like him to talk a little bit about Congresswoman Moore as well, but then also George Bray. For those of you who don't know, he is the executive director of the George Bray Center. And so two really remarkable figures that have influenced history in Racine, Black history in particular, who we're recognizing today. And I'd like to call them up today to talk a little bit about both of them.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I have one of these?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, I've been fasting all day, so I haven't had any water or anything. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I see a lot of faces that are familiar, that I know that you are servants and your spirits are just as powerful as the people that we are recognizing today. And I can say that firsthand because I'm going to start with Lloyd Jackson, if Cory doesn't mind, because I marched with Lloyd Jackson back in the 60s with Chuck Tyler when they had the old Racine Street Center, and they had built a new center out at Humboldt Park. And the African American community was very upset with the establishment of that center. Not that they didn't like the center being there, but they felt that the south side of Racine needed a center. And what came out of that march, which there was some violence involved in that march, nobody killed or anything, but what came out of that was the Dr. John Bryant Community Center. And so I was part of that. Lloyd Jackson was a strong voice, powerful man, but a very humble and beautiful spirit. And I thank God that I had a chance to be around him, rub shoulders with him and Chuck Tyler, because they were pillars in our community, you know, way back in the past. And I guess I'm dating myself, and I have no problem doing that. Corrine Owens, I mean, there's two things I'm gonna say about Miss Owens. And she was a great educator, but more important, she was one of the greatest servants that I've ever seen in my life. And in fact, up on the Bray Center wall, many of you have been there, it says that it's about service, sacrifice, and spirit. And she typified that. And because of that, she will be the next mural that will be going up at the Bray Center. And we're just trying to stage an event that would be appreciated by her and her spirit and what she contributed to our community. But she will be the next mural that goes up in the center. And last but not least, my mother's funeral was held at the Bray Center in 2000, and we didn't have anybody to play any music. My mom was pretty simple Christian revolutionary, and that's what I call her. Taught Bible class in our neighborhood for 40 years. And we didn't have anyone to play the piano or sing or anything. I don't know, somehow that got omitted. Miss Owens stepped up, played the piano, and sung at my mother's funeral like it was all part of the plan. And I will be eternally indebted to her for that. Gwen, you already know her mural's up at the center. Gwen is, you know, my best friend, and we go way back, and we go back to the PTAC recall election. That's when I first met Gwen. And ever since then, we had a kinship of spirit. And, you know, I would put my life on the line for Gwen because I believe that's what she does for her community in our nation and in the world every day. And she, again, her mural is already up at the center, and she typifies having great service, making great sacrifices, and doing it in the right spirit. She does that. And, you know, Gwen is, I pray for all of you every day, but Gwen is in my prayer especially because there's such a gridlock, you know, at our federal level that hopefully something can happen so we can get things done that need to be done for all people. George Bray, my first story about George Bray was I grew up in the Bray Center neighborhood, and there was times I was a little rambunctious young man. So I used to leave school early and even got kicked out of school, and every time I would walk down the hill by Walden School, George Bray would call my mother and say, is Chuck supposed to be in school? And that was my name. And he said, is Chuck supposed to be in school? She said, yes. Well, he's out on the playground and I see him walking down the street. And when I got home, the belt and everything was waiting for me. So I knew Mr. Bray personally in our neighborhood, and there's nothing to say, because that was a time where if somebody told on you and your parents whooped you, you better not say nothing to that adult about what they said about you, because you would get another whooping. And that was the time we grew up in. But what I remember most about George Bray is that he was a humanitarian. George was a humanitarian. He was the first president of the NAACP. He was the first director of the Martin Luther King Center, which back in the day was the Breakthrough Center. He was an alderman in the city, and he was also a very, very good artist. And his spirit still is there in the Bray Center, and those words about the sacrifice, the service, the spirit, I think he typified that. And all I'm trying to do is be a keeper of that vision. The vision belongs to him and Thelma Orr and other people who were in that neighborhood, and Bernice Moore and Jacob Lott. They were all pillars in that community that saw something. They saw the need for a facility that was owned by the people and for the people. And the Bray Center is the only center that is not run by city government. No problem with municipalities, Cory, but it's not run by anyone, and that allows the center to be free to really deal with issues as they come forward, and especially progressive issues. And I think George Bray will be proud of what the center represents now, and I just try to continue to humbly represent the spirit that all of these individuals who I've been blessed to have contact with in my lives, and they've influenced me in a very positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jameel. That was great. A couple other people I want to mention. Again, I mentioned them at the beginning, but I want to remind people. Joshua Glover. It's a great story in terms of the history of abolition, the abolition movement in this state and this country, frankly. He was a runaway slave from St. Louis who sought asylum in Racine in the 1850s. He was found then by bounty hunters and imprisoned in Milwaukee under the Fugitive Slave Act, but with help from abolitionists from both Racine and Milwaukee, actually broke him out of the jail and got him onto freedom to Canada there and afterwards. But it also led to a really important legal development where Wisconsin became the first state to declare the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional under Wisconsin's Constitution. So that all came from events that started right here in Racine, Wisconsin. And I think it's something about which we should be extremely proud. The library has a book called Finding Freedom that you can check out to learn more about it. It's a great read. I'd recommend it to anybody. And it's really one of the greatest moments, I think, in Racine history is that chapter. The other person I want to recommend or talk about a little bit and recommend through a book that I'm going to donate to the library today, but the Wisconsin Historical Society put out this book recently, and it's about a Racine man named William Blue Jenkins, and it's a great story. There's actually a book on the guy. There was a PhD history candidate who sat down with Blue for over the course of several days and got, I believe, more than 28 hours of audio recording where he talked about everything from arriving here when he was 5 years old from Mississippi to the present day in 1974, and talked about everything from crosses being burned in his front yard when he was a young boy to helping to be an organizer with UAW Local 553 at what became Racine Steel Casting, and leading a sit-down strike and really insisting that both black and white workers were treated with respect and dignity at the workplace, and went on to really hold a number of very important positions in both the civil rights and labor movement, and became a regional Midwestern director of foundry workers with the United Auto Workers across the Midwest. And according to the accounts, and I have no reason not to believe it. He was the chairman of the Racine Labor Council, which is the council of all the labor unions. And that's not only was he the first African-American chair of the Racine Labor Council, it is believed that he was the first African-American chair of any labor council in the U.S. So he really played an important role in labor history and civil rights. And the great thing is there's this book, and it's written really, I believe, for fourth graders. It has definitions and terms on it, but you really get a sense of the expanse of his life and the contributions that he made, both for the African American community and for workers' rights, and really for Racine generally. And I'd encourage anybody to pick it up and read it. It's a fascinating read. Someday when I have 28 spare hours, I would really love to listen to all of those audio recordings that the State Historical Society has, but for now, I'll be content with the book they put out. The next person we want to talk about is actually a former colleague of mine, somebody who encouraged me to get into elected office very early on. I remember knowing Bob for years, but when I first was thinking about getting involved in politics, I went to a fundraiser that Bob was having, and John Lehman had recently announced that he was running for the Senate, and I walked in the room and he said, "Cory, you're number 11. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're the 11th person here who might run for John Lehman's seat, so if you're going to do it, you better move it quick, because who knows who's going to announce." And after becoming elected, Bob served as a real mentor and gave great advice on everything from Veterans Affairs to things affecting the African American community, to just being around for 20 plus years in the State Assembly and teaching the new guy the ropes. I was lucky to sit right next to him on the floor of the Assembly. When they asked me, where I wanted to sit, I said, I'd really like to sit next to Bob Turner. And then, I don't know if anybody will appreciate that, but it also meant I had to sit next to Marlon Schneider. That's what they didn't tell me. But he was a great advisor and mentor. But to talk more about him, I'd like to have Pastor Hargrove come up and say a few words about him.
All right, thanks for Representative Mason for inviting me to come and speak on Bob Turner. Also, just thank you for just acknowledging the whole issue of the leadership, not just at national level, but also at the local level that we do have. Just quick, maybe a quick note that people may not know who don't know Bob, and that is actually Bob is my cousin. And he now I say that for a reason, because he actually came here with my father, who was the first of his family to come to Racine back in the late 50s. And he came up here with him, and I didn't realize that until, of course, later on in life. And so I thank God for him. He, even him serving in the military, during the Vietnam War. But when he came up here with my father, he talked about it all the time, and how he was mentored by him, as he was coming up. And I go back and I reflect on what Jameel was saying about just spirit, sacrifice and service, and what I see with Bob, and we've had some conversations, some good and some maybe not so good, but we've had some conversations. And I remember when he was, before he even became a representative, he was also an alderman. And in the time that he spent there as an alderman, then when he became a representative, he actually would go back and forth from Racine to Madison, sometimes, just in a day's time, and he'd go to Madison, he'd turn around and come right back to Racine, cast votes, and run back up to Madison, and continue what he was doing up there. And what that showed me was that there was a duty to service. I mean, he wanted to serve Racine. Again, like I said, we had conversations. Most of them were good, but hey, we may not have agreed on everything. But what I can say is that, just from growing up, and knowing Bob, as a relative, but also knowing him as a representative, knowing that at the end of the day, he really did want to serve his community, and he did. Growing up, I remember, conversations, and I hear people saying, well, if they got frustrated with the mayor, or they got frustrated with something, they'd say, call Bob, he'll know what to do. And so I remember that, as a little kid, I remember him saying that, call Bob, he'll know what to do. And I remember him trying to do just that. I remember him trying to give advice. I remember him trying to, share what the knowledge he had, concerning, what was happening in Racine at that time as well. And so I do thank Representative Mason for acknowledging him in that. But the other thing is that Bob, being a veteran, is the other piece I want to share with you, because he never forgot, what it meant to be a soldier, and I believe that carried over and also into his mindset of what duty was all about. And so I do thank God for him crossing our paths, as an alderman as well as a representative up at the state. So, and one quick thing too, and some of you know Julian Thomas way more than I do, but I came to know Julian Thomas. I was sitting on the council in 06, and we were dealing with the whole issue of the resegregation, it was called committee. It was a committee on resegregation, and at that time they were thinking about not resegregating again, and actually going back to segregated schools. And we sat on a committee with that, and I remember, paper after paper, article after article, seeing, the fight that Julian Thomas, NAACP, as well as local pastors have put up so far as the concept of understanding the dangers of trying to segregate, and and just the courage it had taken at that point in time, for that to happen. And so again, I really only knew Julian Thomas, through a lot of times just reading and talking with him as he had retired and he was still doing some things. But reading what he was doing with NAACP back then was phenomenal, because it also took a man of courage to be able to face down a lot of the racism and face down a lot of the hatred that was even more present even up here in the north. And so just a quick note to that. I just wanted to just acknowledge just his service also to Racine as the Racine branch NAACP leader, which of course we now have Julian Thomas Elementary School named after him, based off of his service to the community. And so again, Cory, thanks again for just allowing me to say a few words about Mr. Turner, and also about Julian Thomas.
And also just to add a few more words about Julian Thomas, Pastor Garrison's going to mention a few words about him as well.
Thank you. I was back here and I was listening to the response of Brother Jameel, and every time you said someone in history, you say, well, that was my cousin.
I have the paperwork right.
And about the third time I said, look, I think I better hold on to this guy. But it's really wonderful when you hear names of persons that came through your congregation. But more than that, I want to just commend State Representative Cory Mason. It is very easy to be complacent. It's very easy to enjoy your political position, your fame, and not deal with anything as controversial as African American history. I mean, why should he be motivated to lift up African American history? Well, African American history is no different than American history, or Native American history, or Chinese American history, or Hispanic American history. We all are in this together. And I want to applaud him by lifting up these persons of history that made our life so comfortable that we take a lot of things for granted. When you look at Julian Thomas, as indicated, he didn't have an easy road. Neither did Corey Owens, neither did any of these persons in history, because they had to step out and do things that were not quite as comfortable as we would like for them to be. And I would like to think that Corey's doing a little bit of that as well. It's just making a statement, and sometimes lifting up the consciousness of our leaders. It's not an easy thing to do. So I applaud him, and I just wanted to remind us we need to support him and make sure that we have the right leaders in an assembly, and the right leaders in our government office, and the right leaders in Congress that will lift us up and to work towards people of dignity, so that this America can be exactly the country that we would like for it to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And if we could give a round of applause to all of my co-hosts tonight for helping us out. To close, there's a couple people I need to acknowledge. First, people have asked, why are you so into history? My high school history teacher is here, Tammy Hayward. And, you know, my mom will tell you I wasn't exactly a stellar student at the time with, you know, late homework and skip school days and a few other impediments, but something must have rubbed off because I care deeply about history in our local community. But I'm joined by several members of my family, my mom, Roseanne, my sister Rosemary, my niece Alexandria, my other niece Sydney, my wife Rebecca, and my 3 children, Eleanor, Amelia, and Cory. So thanks very much for having them here tonight. And then just as laying the groundwork for next month, we'll be celebrating Women's History Month. And for those of you who don't know, my daughters are named Eleanor Roosevelt Mason and Amelia Earhart Mason. So I have a well-established interest in women's history issues as well. But next month we'll be honoring local women who should be recognized as part of Women's History Month. And I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for joining me at this event. And again, thank you to the Racine Library for putting this on. I'm hoping that there's a record of this, and hopefully future generations looking back at some of these figures might have an oral presentation, however brief as it might have been, to describe some of these figures that are so important to Racine and our history. So thank you very much for being here. There's Kringle in the back, there's blue books, there's maps. Please take them, and thank you so much for being part of this evening.